They say life throws you curves when you least expect it. I guess I always thought there'd be a point, a nice, neat finish line where everything just clicked. A quiet, simple routine, no more youthful angst, just smooth sailing. But maybe life isn't built that way. Maybe there are moments that are supposed to shake you, rattle your cage, make you question everything you thought was set in stone. I'm Sarah, and I just turned 63. After a lifetime as a high school principal and raising two amazing kids, I had my life blueprint all figured out. My husband Tom passed 5 years ago, and since then, I've built a life of quiet comfort. Morning walks in Central Park, tending my little garden patch in the city, keeping up with family. I thought excitement, spontaneity, those were relics of my younger days, tucked away in photo albums. But recently, something shifted, a subtle tremor I couldn't quite place. A lingering glance, a quiet moment, a connection that felt innocent until, well, it didn't. Michael, my son, has a friend, David. David's been practically family for years. Like another son, someone I trusted implicitly, valued deeply. Then, in the blink of an eye, one ordinary afternoon, the ground shifted. A silence fell between us, thick and different, something unspoken hanging in the air, neither of us knowing how to name it. Looking back, it's bizarre how a lifetime of rock-solid stability, that confident self-assurance, could suddenly feel so fragile, so open to question. And now, I'm stuck replaying that day, wondering, what exactly happened, and why can't I shake it? This is my story. My life isn't headline news, but it's been peaceful, and I liked it that way. After almost 30 years shaping young minds as a principal, I retired, dreaming of quiet mornings and peaceful afternoons. My husband Tom, a steady, kind man, passed away 5 years ago. We had our bumps, sure, every marriage does, but we loved each other deeply. Losing him was like losing a part of myself, but I found strength in the rhythm of everyday life, in my close bond with my kids, especially Michael. Michael and I have become even closer since Tom's passing. At 35, Michael is dependable, responsible, everything Tom and I always hoped he'd be. He lives in Brooklyn, but he's always around, bringing laughter and light into my quiet Upper West Side apartment with his stories and his easygoing humor. One of Michael's best friends, David, often tags along. They've been inseparable since college, and David's become a fixture in our lives. At 37, he's built a solid career in engineering. His grounded nature, his dedication, they remind me so much of Tom. David is thoughtful, respectful, with a quiet, contemplative way about him that puts everyone at ease. I've always been grateful for Michael and David's friendship, how they've stayed so close all these years. David's presence is different, a steady calm that's always been welcome here. In all this time, I've thought of David as family, a friend, almost like another son. It was simple, comfortable. I never gave it a second thought, until that Saturday afternoon. Then, everything felt different. One Saturday, after a morning wrestling with my roses on the terrace, I decided to treat myself to a cup of Earl Grey and a quiet afternoon. Michael was out of town, some tech conference in Boston, and the apartment was blissfully silent. Just as I was sinking into my favorite armchair, the doorbell rang. Surprise, it was David. "Hi, Mrs. Reynolds," he greeted me, that familiar warm smile lighting up his face. Michael mentioned he was out of town, but I thought I'd drop off these books I borrowed. "David, honey, it's so good to see you," I said, genuinely happy for the unexpected company. "Come in. You're welcome to stay for tea if you're not rushing off." He hesitated for a beat, then nodded. "I'd like that. It's been a while since I've just relaxed." We settled in the living room, sunlight streaming through the windows, dust motes dancing in the air. For the first few minutes, the conversation was easy, light, work, family, the usual catch-up. But something in the air felt different. Maybe it was the quiet of the empty apartment. Maybe it was the slower pace of our conversation. But I felt this unusual sense of ease around him, a relaxed comfort that was new. As I handed him his tea, our fingers brushed. Didn't think much of it, just a fleeting touch. But as we kept talking, I couldn't help noticing David's gaze lingering a fraction longer than usual. His attention was laser-focused on our conversation, a warmth in his expression, a sincerity that felt personal, almost intimate. We moved to the kitchen to grab a snack, conversation flowing effortlessly. Reaching for a plate, our hands brushed again. This time, it wasn't fleeting. A brief but definite contact, a small thrill like a tiny electric shock zipped through me. I looked up, met his eyes. Suddenly, I felt intensely self-conscious. "Thanks," I mumbled, pulling my hand back a little too quickly. He smiled, a sheepish little smile, and for a beat there was this charged silence, a moment of mutual unspoken embarrassment. Neither of us quite knew what to say. It was small, really, just a hand on mine, a moment of hesitation. But in that split second, something shifted. A warmth, an awareness sparked between us, something I hadn't anticipated, a connection that went beyond just friendly. I brushed it off as my imagination, telling myself it was just a momentary lapse, the quiet of the afternoon playing tricks on my mind. But as we kept chatting, I became acutely aware of him, noticing the small things, the way he leaned in when I spoke, his quiet chuckle, the warmth in his eyes when he looked at me. It felt like an invisible line had been drawn between us, something neither of us acknowledged, but both sensed, humming beneath the surface of our conversation. By the time David left, I was left with this odd feeling, an awareness of him, a lingering warmth that hadn't been there before. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was nothing, absolutely nothing. But the memory of his touch, his gaze, that quiet intensity in his eyes, it stuck with me. I felt foolish, ridiculous even, for even thinking about it, for letting my mind wander down paths it shouldn't. David was family, Michael's best friend, someone I'd watched grow up from a gangly college kid into a successful man. But I couldn't deny the little jolt I'd felt in his presence, that unexpected warmth, that comfort that lingered long after he'd gone. I found myself wondering if he'd felt it too. Or was it just me? A passing fancy, a feeling stirred up by loneliness, nostalgia. I brushed it aside, told myself I was overthinking, reading way too much into nothing. Yet, the feeling lingered like a question mark hanging in the air, unanswered at the back of my mind. A week later, David stopped by again, this time to return a book for real. He seemed relaxed, easy. I invited him in, felt that same unexpected warmth flood through me again. We talked easily, the conversation drifting from light topics to something deeper, more personal. He told me about his work, his ambitions, the challenges he was facing, navigating his career, his life. As he spoke, I felt this surge of pride, like a mother watching her son come into his own. But there was something else too, a growing awareness of the way he looked at me, the attentiveness in his gaze, the unspoken connection that felt both natural and unsettlingly thrilling. Our conversations became more intimate, more revealing. With each visit, I felt this unspoken tension growing, a subtle undercurrent, a quiet understanding that neither of us voiced, but both felt, vibrating in the space between us. I kept telling myself it was nothing, just a comfortable friendship, but deep down, I knew it was more. Something different, a feeling I hadn't expected and definitely didn't know how to handle. Over the next few weeks, David's visits became more frequent. Each time he showed up at my door, I felt this mix of excitement and guilt churning in my stomach. I genuinely enjoyed his company, looked forward to our conversations, the warmth, the understanding he brought into my life. Yet, I also felt this gnawing unease, a quiet fear that I was crossing a line, letting myself entertain feelings that had no place in our lives. One evening, as we sat in the living room, paging through an old photo album, laughing at faded snapshots of Michael as a goofy kid, I realized just how much I'd come to crave his presence. We laughed over shared memories, silly stories, and for a moment, just a fleeting moment, I felt a sense of companionship, a deep connection that I hadn't felt in years. But then, as he leaned closer to see a photo, his arm brushed against mine. My heart slammed against my ribs. Such a small thing. But the proximity, the warmth of his touch, sent a shockwave through me that I couldn't ignore. I looked at him, our eyes locking. For a breathless second, I felt this connection, raw, undeniable, that went way beyond friendship. A quiet, unspoken bond that left me both exhilarated and terrified. I knew, with a chilling certainty, I had to stop this, to create distance, to put a brake on whatever this was before it spiraled out of control. Yet each time I tried to steel myself to end these visits, to put an end to this, whatever it was, I felt this pang of regret, a sharp longing for the comfort, the warmth he brought into my life. I couldn't deny the loneliness that had become my constant companion since Tom died, that quiet ache that had settled in, become a part of my everyday existence. David's presence filled that void, brought a sense of companionship and understanding that I hadn't realized I was starving for. And though I knew, deep down, that these feelings were inappropriate, wrong even, I couldn't bring myself to let go. to slam the door shut on the one connection that, in some strange way, made me feel alive again. One evening, Michael's still in Boston. David came by to drop off groceries. He'd picked them up at the market, just a kind gesture. I invited him to stay for dinner. We ended up spending the whole evening in the kitchen, cooking together, laughing, sharing stories, just enjoying each other's company in that easy, comfortable way we had. As the night deepened, our conversation shifted, grew quieter, more reflective. David started opening up, sharing his own struggles, his own loneliness, the tightrope walk of balancing his demanding career with a personal life that felt empty. I listened, really listened, feeling this deep sense of empathy, understanding, a connection that went beyond words, beyond polite conversation. At one point, as I was rinsing dishes at the sink, I felt David's hand on my shoulder. Light touch, gentle, reassuring. But it sent a jolt of warmth, a tremor through me that I couldn't ignore. I looked up, met his gaze. In that moment, in the soft kitchen light, I saw it reflected in his eyes. The same feelings, a quiet longing, a depth of emotion that took my breath away. I don't know how to say this, he began, his voice low, almost hesitant. But I feel something between us, Sarah. I don't know what it is exactly, but I can't ignore it anymore. My heart hammered in my chest. A mixture of surprise, fear, something like exhilaration surged within me. I wanted to deny it, to laugh it off, to brush it aside as nothing. But I knew that would be a lie, a blatant, painful lie. I looked at him, saw the vulnerability etched on his face, the same uncertainty, the same longing mirrored in my own heart. David, I replied, my voice barely a whisper. We can't. This isn't something we can pursue. He nodded, slowly, sadly, but his hand stayed on my shoulder. A quiet reassurance, a silent acknowledgement of his own confusion, his own internal battle. We stood there in silence, the only sound the gentle hum of the refrigerator, both of us grappling with the weight of those unspoken emotions, the sudden stark reality of the boundary we'd silently, unknowingly crossed. After a long, heavy moment, he stepped back, his expression etched with regret. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." "You didn't," I said, offering him a small, shaky smile. "It's just complicated." We finished dinner in silence, the atmosphere thick with unspoken words, tense, but oddly comforting. I knew, with a heavy heart, that whatever had sparked between us, it was real, undeniably real, but impossible. And though we said little else that night, we both understood, in the quiet language of unspoken emotions, that some lines, once seen, couldn't be unseen, no matter how tempting they might seem. In the weeks that followed our kitchen confession, David continued to visit, but everything had changed. We both approached each encounter with a guarded awareness, a careful politeness that hadn't been there before. We maintained this silent agreement, this unspoken understanding, that we would keep our emotions in check, rigorously avoiding anything that could be misconstrued, anything that could reignite that spark. Our visits, once filled with easy laughter, comfortable silences, became carefully orchestrated exchanges. Each of us keenly aware of the new, invisible boundary we had drawn between us. But as much as we tried to pretend, the tension was undeniable. A fleeting glance, a subtle gesture, the way our conversations sometimes drifted into quieter, more reflective territory. Everything felt heightened. Each visit felt like walking a tightrope, balancing precariously between friendship and something unspoken, something dangerous. And I felt like I was constantly holding my breath, waiting for something to shift again, for the fragile balance to shatter. I found myself aching for the easy camaraderie we once shared, that uncomplicated friendship that now felt lost, buried beneath the growing complexity between us. One evening, as we sat in the living room discussing a book, some literary novel Michael had recommended, David's hand brushed against mine again. The touch was even more fleeting this time, barely noticeable, but it sent the same jolt through me, the same unwelcome reminder of the feelings I was desperately trying to bury, to ignore. I glanced at him, our eyes meeting for a fraction of a second, a look that felt both tender and charged, heavy with meaning. He quickly looked away, a flush creeping up his neck. But the silence that followed was thick with unspoken understanding. We were both struggling to maintain our resolve, struggling to keep the lid on something that wanted to boil over. As much as I tried to convince myself that this was just friendship, a deep, comfortable friendship, I couldn't deny the pull I felt towards him. a quiet, persistent longing that I knew with every fiber of my being had no place in my life. I thought constantly about ending these visits, about creating real distance, about shutting the door completely. But each time the thought surfaced, I felt this sharp pang of regret, this almost physical ache of loss. I had become so attached to these moments, to the warmth, the unexpected companionship that David brought into my life. The idea of letting it all go, of cutting him out completely, filled me with a sense of emptiness, a profound loss that I hadn't anticipated. In a desperate effort to create some distance, some breathing room, I started filling my days with activities, with plans, anything to keep myself occupied, to keep my mind from drifting back to those quiet afternoons with David. I joined a gardening club in the neighborhood, started taking long walks along the Hudson, volunteered at the local library, anything to distract myself. But despite my best efforts, each time he visited, I found myself drawn back in, pulled back into that magnetic field of connection, the unspoken bond between us, as strong, as undeniable as ever. One Saturday, we found ourselves alone again, the quiet apartment wrapping around us like a blanket. Sharing tea, discussing some article in the Times, something about the city's changing landscape, a topic that had us both laughing, reminiscing about old New York. The moment was light, almost carefree, a flicker of the old ease. But the undercurrent of tension was still there, humming beneath the surface, an invisible hum that neither of us could ignore. I saw it in the way his eyes lingered on me, in the almost imperceptible softening of his smile, as if he too was struggling to keep things light, to pretend, to ignore the bond that was tightening, growing deeper with each meeting. The unspoken agreement between us, that fragile truce, began to feel brittle, as though it could shatter at any moment. We were both pretending that nothing had changed, that our visits were no different from those we'd had for years. But as the weeks ticked by, I sensed that we were both reaching a breaking point, a point where something would have to give, where the emotions we were so carefully keeping hidden would need to be addressed, one way or another. There were moments, stolen moments, when I would catch him looking at me, his expression unreadable, a mix of longing and confusion, as though he too was questioning where this precarious path was leading us. And each time I felt this rush of conflicting emotions, excitement, fear, guilt, a dizzying cocktail. I knew, with a growing sense of dread, that what I was feeling was dangerous, that it could lead to consequences neither of us wanted, consequences that could ripple outwards, hurting Michael, hurting us both in ways I couldn't even fully imagine. Yet, despite the risks, despite the gnawing guilt, I couldn't bring myself to end it, to say the words that would draw a final, definitive line between us. The tension between us thickened with each passing day until our meetings became this delicate, agonizing dance, a careful ballet of restraint and quiet longing. We were both holding back, acutely aware of the boundary we weren't willing to cross, yet utterly unable to let go of the connection that had drawn us so close. It was a complicated, painful feeling, and I often found myself lying awake at night, staring at the city lights flickering outside my window, wondering how long we could keep up this impossible charade, how long we could ignore the emotions simmering just beneath the surface. But deep down, a cold, unwelcome voice whispered in the dark, I knew this couldn't last. We were both playing with fire, and eventually one of us would have to pull back, to make the difficult, necessary decision to let go. And as much as I dreaded that moment, I knew it was coming. A stark, unavoidable reality that was becoming harder and harder to ignore with each passing day. After weeks of maintaining this carefully constructed balance, I began to feel the weight of guilt pressing down on me, heavier and heavier. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was betraying something, betraying Michael's trust, betraying my own values, the moral compass I'd always prided myself on, and perhaps even betraying David in some unspoken way by allowing myself to become emotionally entangled in something that had no future, no real possibility of happiness. I was indulging in a fantasy, a dangerous illusion that had no place in our real lives, something that could only lead to hurt, to regret, to irreparable damage. Each time I even considered ending our connection, severing the fragile thread that still held us together, I felt that sharp pang of sadness, that deep reluctance to let go of the one bond that had brought a flicker of warmth, a semblance of meaning back into my lonely days. But I knew, with a growing sense of clarity, that I couldn't continue like this. I started reflecting on the root of my feelings, trying to dissect, to understand what had led me down this unexpected path. Perhaps it was the loneliness, the quiet, persistent ache of loss I'd felt since Tom passed. A void that had settled into my life without me even fully realizing its depth, its insidious power. David had unknowingly stumbled into that void, filled that emptiness with his presence, his kindness, his unexpected warmth. He had brought a sense of companionship and understanding that I hadn't even known I was missing. But even as I acknowledged this, even as I understood the roots of my feelings, I knew that they were inappropriate, misplaced, that I was risking far too much, jeopardizing too many precious relationships for a connection that, in the clear light of day, had no future. One evening, as I sat alone in the living room, the city lights twinkling like distant stars, I made a decision. It was time to confront my emotions head on, to truly understand what I was searching for, what I was truly craving. I realized that while I genuinely valued David's presence, it was my own loneliness that I needed to address. My own deep-seated need for companionship that had unknowingly led me down this tangled path. David had simply been the catalyst, the unexpected presence who had unintentionally filled that void, provided a fleeting sense of comfort in a way that I hadn't anticipated, hadn't sought out, but had ultimately become dangerously entangled with. Determined to move forward, to reclaim my own life, my own sense of peace, I resolved to create some real distance between us. To consciously, deliberately, create a space that would allow me to untangle myself, to let go of the inappropriate, impossible feelings I had developed. It was a painful decision, a wrenching, gut-twisting decision, one that left me feeling hollow, strangely empty. But I knew, with a quiet certainty, that it was the right choice, the only choice. I couldn't continue living with this gnawing guilt, this constant feeling that I was compromising my own values, betraying the trust of those I loved. I needed to find a way to regain my own sense of self, to heal the loneliness within me without relying on someone else, especially someone who was so deeply connected to my family, to fill that void. The following day, I planned to talk to David, to gently but firmly explain that we needed to maintain some distance, to consciously rebuild the boundaries of our friendship, to respect the lives we had both built, separately, and to protect the delicate web of relationships that connected us all. As much as it hurt, as much as a part of me resisted, I knew that this was the only way to find my way back to peace, the only way to preserve the integrity of our long-standing friendship, without crossing a line that would inevitably lead to regret, to pain, to irreparable damage. As I prepared for that difficult conversation, a strange mix of emotions washed over me. Sadness, yes, a deep, aching sadness for something that could never be, but also a sense of relief, a fragile sense of closure that allowed me to look at the situation with a clearer, more objective mind. I knew that this was a necessary step, a painful but ultimately necessary decision that would, in the long run, help me to move forward, to let go of the tangled web of feelings that had complicated my life in ways I hadn't anticipated, hadn't wanted, but had, nonetheless, allowed to take root. And though I knew it would take time, a long, slow process of healing and readjustment, I felt a quiet sense of determination flicker within me. A fragile but persistent belief that I could eventually find my way back to the peace, the quiet stability I had once known. Our final conversation was bittersweet. A quiet, almost anticlimactic ending to something that had brought both unexpected joy and profound confusion into my life. When David arrived that evening, I invited him in, feeling the weight of the moment, the heavy sense that this was goodbye. We sat in the living room, the familiar space suddenly charged with unspoken emotions, each of us acutely aware of the tension that hung in the air, the unspoken feelings that had been building, layer upon layer, over the past few months. I struggled to find the right words that would express everything I was feeling, the complex tangle of emotions, without hurting him, without making things even more complicated, more painful. "David," I began, my voice soft, but as steady as I could manage. "I've been thinking a lot about everything, about our connection, and I think it's best if we create a bit of space." I paused, took a deep breath, forced myself to meet his gaze. "I valued our friendship so much, David, more than you know, and I don't want to lose that. But I also don't want things to become more complicated than they already are." He looked at me, his expression a complex mix of understanding, sadness, and something akin to relief. "I understand, Sarah," he said, his voice low, quiet. "I never meant to cause any tension. or make things difficult for you. I felt a pang of regret, a wave of unexpected sadness wash over me. You haven't done anything wrong, David, I said quickly. Truly, it's just, I think I let myself become too attached, and I need to take a step back, to focus on finding that sense of peace within myself again. He nodded slowly, his gaze soft, understanding, and for a long, heavy moment, there was just silence between us. A quiet, unspoken understanding that this was the end of our close visits, the close of a chapter that had been meaningful, but also fraught with unspoken, impossible emotions. I'll miss you, he said softly, his voice barely more than a whisper. I'll miss you too, David, I replied, feeling a lump form in my throat. But this is for the best. It's what we both need. We shared a long, silent look, each of us processing the finality of the moment, the quiet realization that this was goodbye. I felt a wave of emotions wash over me. Relief, yes. Sadness, a deep, profound sadness, but also a quiet gratitude for the connection we had shared, even though it had been brief and complicated and ultimately impossible. As David rose to leave, he gave me a gentle hug, a warm, comforting embrace that felt like a farewell to everything unspoken, everything shared, everything that could never be. When the door closed softly behind him, I felt a sudden, sharp sense of emptiness, a hollow ache in my chest that I knew would take time to heal. But beneath the sadness, beneath the loss, I also felt a quiet strength, a fragile sense of peace that I hadn't felt in weeks. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep within me, that this was the right choice, that we had both, in our own way, taken a necessary step toward preserving our lives, our values, our integrity. In the days that followed, I found myself reflecting on our bond, on the quiet moments that had brought us so close, and on the tangled web of emotions that had threatened to pull us apart. I realized that while our connection had been intense, undeniably powerful, it was also, ultimately, a stark reminder of the importance of boundaries, of the essential need to protect the relationships that truly define us, the relationships that are built on solid ground, on shared history, on genuine, uncomplicated affection. Though I missed David's presence, the easy comfort of his company, I knew that ending things had been the right choice, a necessary decision that would, in time, allow me to move forward with a renewed sense of clarity, a clearer sense of purpose. And as I looked toward the future, toward the quiet, unfolding chapters of my life, I felt a quiet determination begin to bloom within me, a resolve to find peace within myself, to heal the lingering loneliness that had, unwittingly, led me down this unexpected and ultimately impossible path, and to embrace the hard-won lessons I had learned along the way.